Good morning, Real Life Church. Welcome to week 4 of our missions emphasis. Every year we take the Sundays from between Mother's Day and Father's Day, and we focus it on our global outreach and reaching the world for Jesus. At your seats, you should have a mission emphasis booklet. This has names and pictures of everyone that we support currently. If you want to take this back with you and try and part of your daily, weekly prayer time, pick one or more people to pray for on a daily or weekly basis. I know they really appreciate it. And also on that commitment card, there's a spot if you want to prayerfully consider what you could be giving or what you could be doing. The more we can give, the more missionaries we can support, and the more people we can reach across the world. This morning, we have the privilege of having the Evans here. If we can give them a warm, real-life welcome.
Well, good morning, Real Life Church. We have a lot of places around the world, or several places around the world that feel like home, and this is one of those places. You are like family to us and just very dear to us. We want to say thank you for all your prayer and your support. Thank you for praying for our family. Thank you for praying for Europe. Europe really needs our prayer, your prayers, so thank you. And specifically for our family, just know that prayer is important. There were many times when we would be in Belgium and we would receive an encouraging message, or someone would write and say they're praying for us, and they didn't realize that that was the exact moment that we needed that. People specifically in this church have sent us a very specific message or a very specific amount of money, not knowing what we were going through, and it just came right when we needed it. So that really, it builds faith, and it just shows how connected we all are to the work going on. Mm-hmm. And I also want to say thank you for praying for our family specifically. This past year, since we've been back in the States, you are the hands and feet of Jesus to our family. Thank you. I just want to say personally, I'm sure Justin will talk more on this, but I want to say thank you for all the meals, groceries delivered, gifts, prayer, messages, cards. They made a world of difference to us. I truly was, earlier this year, could not cook, let alone go to the store, and so there was a point where we really did feel like we were drowning, and Real Life Church, really, you guys stepped up to the plate, and you just made a huge, huge difference for us. Something as simple as a meal for us was enough to get day by day, so to help us just look for the next day and what God was doing in our lives at that time. And even now, we are still so thankful for all of your prayers and support. Like I said, you're very dear to us, and it is an honor, such an honor, to be here with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. All right. I'll take the stairs. Okay, so our family, we serve in Brussels, Belgium. You see on the map, this is the size of Belgium compared to Minnesota. It's a small country, centrally located in Europe, very densely populated. I think it's a seventh of the size of Minnesota, but double the population of Minnesota, just for a comparison. I'll share a little bit more about our ministry there later on in the sermon. But First of all, I want to pull back the curtain a little. I want to invite you into our story. I can promise that I will be honest with you, okay? So, what do you think is the greatest sports movie ever made? I'm sure there's some opinions on this one. We're in Minnesota, right? So someone's got to say Miracle. I think it's an obligation. Someone has to think Miracle is. I love it. That's a good movie. Mighty Ducks, of course. Another really good one. Rudy? Anyone say Rudy? Yeah. Okay. Sandlot. Yeah, that's a good one. Now, I grew up in Indiana, so of course I'm going to say Hoosiers, right? Now, the last few years, I have been doing the noble work of introducing our kids to the great and classic sports movies. Actually, just on Friday night, I discovered my wife had not seen Hoosiers. I thought that she had seen Hoosiers, so on Friday we watched that. Now, of course, one of the movies that we made sure to watch was Chariots of Fire. Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. This is me on the beach in St. Andrews because I had to get the picture. Da, 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 da. When I run, I feel God's pleasure. Okay. My Scottish accent is terrible. You've seen Chariots of Fire. I hope you've seen Chariots of Fire. Amazing story about Eric Liddell, the Scottish-born Olympic champion, won the gold medal for his country. Later went and became a missionary to China, where he was martyred, 1945. Now, if you know the story of Eric Liddell, you know that he was almost a non-starter, right? See, he refused to run in the Olympic qualifying race because it fell on a Sunday. To run on a Sunday, said Eric, well, that would violate the Sabbath. It's a funny little rule, isn't it? It made the top 10 list of the Bible rules, though, right? It's right up there with don't murder, don't steal. But, we'd be honest, it's not really one that we care a whole lot about much more. You can imagine why I would be surprised when in the fall of 2019, I felt like God was beginning to speak to me, convict me about Sabbath. I didn't realize at the time that God was inviting me on a journey, and it wasn't necessarily a journey that I wanted to be on. We were 2 years into serving in Belgium at the time. We were working at the Bible school there. And ministry, just to be very honest, ministry was going really well, like better than it had ever been. Jessica and I, we felt that God was calling us. We were nearing the end of our 2-year term as missionaries there, and we felt that God was calling us that we need to commit ourselves to serve a lifetime there, and things were going well. Sabbath. In Genesis 1, we read that God created the heavens and the earth. Over a period of 6 days, God created the moon, the stars, the birds, the fishes, all the animals, everything in creation. And then on the 7th day, God rested from all of his work. I knew I was working too much, right? Like many people, it was a bad habit that I picked up from my dad. Workaholic, that's the word we use to describe it, right? The workaholic. And maybe if I could just get a little more done, if I could accomplish these great things, maybe people would respect me. Maybe people would love me. Maybe my life would have value. You ever feel that way? Just a little bit more. Do you think God was tired? 6 days of creating the universe? Do you think he needed a rest? Maybe it was just to give us an example. He rested so we can follow his example, and then we can also rest sometimes. I knew I was headed for this burnout, so maybe I needed to learn a little bit more about the Sabbath thing. Maybe I needed to learn how to take a few days off. Sometimes we can get so familiar with Bible stories that we miss some really big parts of what's going on. Genesis 1's a great example of this. See, Christians, we love to talk about things like, was this 6,000 years ago, or was it 15,000 years ago? Or was this billions of years ago? And how exactly long was a day? When it says God created in a day, was that 24 hours, or was a day like this really long? And we debate these things. And it's fun. Like, I like talking about some of this stuff, but there's something bigger of what's going on here in the story of Genesis 1 that maybe we can miss. We can miss the point of what the story is. And I'm going to come back to this, but I want to go to another Bible story. In 2 Chronicles, we read about how Solomon, king of Israel, Solomon, built the temple in Jerusalem. He builds the temple, and then when it's completed, the priests and all the people, they all come to dedicate the temple. It's a remarkable event in Israel's history, and the Bible records Solomon praying to commemorate the dedication of the temple, God's house in Jerusalem. And he asks this question. In 2 Chronicles 6:18, he asks, will God really dwell with mankind on earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house which I have built? It's a profound question. The word for temple in Hebrew, it's heikal, and it literally means just a big house. It's the same word that we translate for the palace. The king lives in a heikal. It's his palace. It's the big house the king lives in. You also have the same word being used for the temple. It's the heikal. It's the big house that God lives in. And so here, Solomon's wrestling with this idea. God's glory fills all of creation. He created the heavens and the earth, and it cannot contain his glory. And yet, he's going to choose to dwell in a little house in a small Middle Eastern town on this little rock of a planet on the corner of the Milky Way galaxy. Will God really dwell on earth with mankind? Solomon goes on and he makes a long prayer. You can read through it. But then he concludes his prayer, same chapter, verse 41. He concludes his prayer and he says, now then arise, Lord God, to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. Now then, arise, Lord God, to your resting place, you and the ark of your might. And we read that God does, in fact, answer Solomon's prayer. Fire comes down from heaven. God's glory fills the temple. And the whole nation, people cannot even stand. They just bow down. They get down on their knees. And they say, you are good. Your love endures forever. That's all they can do. Just, you are good. Your love endures forever. Inside the temple, I'm sure many of you know this, inside the temple, you have like the innermost part of the temple. We call the Holy of Holies. And inside there's a special object called the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark was like a box that you can put special things in. Like the top 10 list, right? The tablet with the 10 commandments, you can put that inside. There's some other things inside there you can read about in the Bible. But it wasn't mainly a box. The ark was mainly a throne. It was a throne for a king to sit on. When Solomon prayed, arise, Lord God, to your resting place. He was inviting God to take his place on the throne as the true king over the nation of Israel. Arise, God, to your resting place, your throne where you sit as the king, the true king of our nation. Back in Genesis 1, there's a pattern to these days of creation. These 6 days. God begins by creating what we'll call 3 realms, and then he creates 3 sets of rulers for those realms. So day 1, what does he create? Creates light, he creates darkness. On day 4, he creates the sun. He creates the moon to govern or to rule light and darkness, the day and the night. On day 2, he creates the sky, creates the sea. On day 5, he creates the birds in the sky, the fishes in the sea. And then on day 3, he creates the dry land. On day 6, mirroring that, he creates the land animals, but then, of course, humans as his representative to represent God there on earth. Now, I want to bring these 2 stories together, okay? Solomon prays, arise to your resting place. God's glory fills the temple. God takes his place on the throne as the king of Israel. On the 7th day of creation, after creating these realms, these rulers, God then rests. See, in Genesis 1, what he's done is he creates the heaven and earth. He's created the cosmic temple, not just the little bitty house in a small Middle Eastern town. He's created all of heaven and all of earth, which his glory fills. And then, on day 7, he rests. He takes his place on the throne as the king of all creation. God doesn't grow tired, does he? He didn't need a breather. In our final weeks in Belgium, I received a message that would set us on a path that we didn't expect. Your father has been moved into hospice care. They expect he has about 10 days left to live. See, we were just in the middle of wrapping up our term, first term as missionaries. We're saying goodbye to our students, our neighbors, our friends, and then everything changes. And it happens sometimes like that, a message, a phone call, something that you just don't expect. And that was a time I was really glad to have a credit card because I needed to make a last-minute plane reservation, emergency trip home. It wasn't in our budget. I flew to Chicago, rented a car, drove straight down to southern Indiana. I got to spend about 5 days with my dad. Just praying. I read through the Gospel of Mark with him. I prayed at one time a prayer of salvation. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. My dad, he wasn't really able to talk. We had no meaningful conversations, but he did say amen. He died on February 12th. And I think 2 days later, I was back on a plane, headed back to Belgium to help our family move back to the United States just a couple weeks after that. And I didn't realize at the time, but our journey was really just beginning. That God gave the law to his people at Mount Sinai. You know the story of the people. They're in Egypt. They're enslaved. God raises up Moses and just this miraculous deliverance. God brings them, Red Sea, all that stuff. Pharaoh's army is destroyed. Brings them to Mount Sinai, and he gives them the list, right? The 10 Commandments is like a summary. of the whole law. Supposedly there's 613. I never bothered to count. I trust the rabbis. 613 laws, the top 10 list, that like summarizes all of it. Jesus summarizes it with just two. You know, that kind of boils it all down. You love God, you love people, and you kind of get the gist of it. But here, God gives them the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. God's resting place is him established on his throne. And that's how God wanted the Israelites to enter into the promised land. They're going to leave Mount Sinai, go into the promised land, and he wanted them to go with God enthroned as king in their midst. A week after we landed back in Chicago, we moved back. Jessica and I were then in Springfield, Missouri. We had our interviews to be appointed as career workers in Europe. My dad had just died. We moved across the ocean. We were tired. I just wanted to grieve. Everyone was kind, though. Everyone was very supportive. And I'm pleased to say they approved us to serve as career missionaries. And then immediately after that was done, we had to leave Missouri, drive back to Indiana for my dad's memorial service. And then just shortly before we arrived, we're on the road, we get a message. The service is canceled. There's this growing concern about a virus spreading around. And they had to cancel the service. And the day after we arrived, then of course everything just went into lockdown. About 10 days after that, Jessica started showing symptoms. She had a severe case of COVID, and it was different than what we were hearing on the news. It wasn't attacking her lungs, her respiratory system. The virus attacked her heart. And we didn't know it at the time. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear. The cardiologist that she now is seeing, he says that she should have been hospitalized. It was a mistake that she wasn't. I can't fully explain her health journey. It's complicated, it's long. I can't really go into all of it. But it was obvious when she recovered from COVID that things were still not right. Her heart was badly damaged by the virus, which in turn led to damage to her nervous system. Her condition now, it's not something that you snap out of. It's a long process to go through and learning how to make these adjustments. Some days, it's hard to get out of bed. And some days are a little bit better. Remember the Sabbath, to keep it holy. After months of living out of suitcases, we finally moved back to Minnesota in the summer last year, and we were just even more tired, desperate for a break. And I know some of you are probably tired. And the weight, the burden of the past year, it's been heavy on you. And you're desperate for a break. And remember the Sabbath. So I started to think that maybe this whole Sabbath thing was about more than a day off. The weeks, the months went by, and the weight of chronic illness just grew heavier. Earlier this year, we were speaking at a church in southern Minnesota, and service went well. Had a good time. The pastor's a friend of ours, and afterwards he had us over to his house, sitting down for a nice meal, and then we get a phone call. Jessica's dad had suffered a massive stroke. They didn't expect him to make it. Another emergency trip. Drive down to see him. By the grace of God, and the prayers of many, he not only survived, he's making an awesome recovery. But then just a couple weeks later, we got another phone call. My mom has cancer. Remember the Sabbath. God, I'm so tired and I can't keep going like this. remember the Sabbath. Keep it holy. Because it's really more an issue of trust, isn't it? I think our work is important. Please don't mistake me. Labor, work, is an important part of creation and how God created it. You read it, it's all the way back there in Genesis. When we observe Sabbath, we're doing something much more than just taking a day off from running races, from gathering firewood. It's more than just not logging in to check our work email. It's making a statement, God, I'm trusting you that everything's going to work out okay. It's my pride that wants to take control of everything, manage everything. I can decide my own fate, maybe decide the fate of others if I just work hard enough. And God is gently inviting me into a Sabbath rest, acknowledging first, He's in control. He's king. He is enthroned over all creation, even my work, even my life, even all the struggles, all the things I'm fighting for, everything I'm working for. So our story this last year has not been easy to write. Real life, Jessica has already said this, but you have played a big part in helping us to do so because we found ourselves stretched to the limit of what we could accomplish and what we could do. And so you brought us meals. You sent us cards. You encouraged us. You prayed for us. And I started to realize Sabbath is also about the community. Without you, I really don't know if we would have been able to make it through this past year. See, more than ever, I'm convinced and believe that God has called us, our family, to serve in Europe. And there's obstacles which need to be overcome. And there's a lot of questions. People ask us questions. They want to know because they know some of our journey. Are you still going? Questions. How are you going to work this out? How's it going to work with health? What kind of doctors are you going to have? How's the visas go? All that stuff. We have questions. The center of all of those questions is really the one that comes from God. Will you trust me? Their calling is much more about a calling to walk forward in faithfulness as He leads us one step by another, trusting Him for each one of those, ultimately trusting that He's enthroned, remembering the Sabbath. This call to Sabbath, it's not just about me, it's not just about you, it's a call that goes out to the ends of the earth. An invitation to trust God, to acknowledge that He is king, He's seated on His throne. And I'll never forget this lady that we met in Belgium. Our kids were going to the public school there. It's in French. And just like here, the kids have birthdays, birthday parties. Our daughter was invited to her classmate's birthday party. And I drop off Savannah, and I'm talking to some of the parents. And I meet a lady who, she asked what we're doing there in Belgium, and I explained we're working at this Bible school. We have, young men, women who want to be pastors of churches here. And we're working with them, working with the church here in Belgium. And I'll never forget, because she says to me, you mean you believe in God? You believe the Bible, what it says is true? Yeah, I do. She says, I've never met someone who believes that. This is a lady in Belgium. She grew up there her whole life. How can she believe? How can she enter into this recognition of Sabbath, that God is on the throne, if she hasn't heard? And how can she hear if no one tells her? And how can someone tell her unless they're sent? There's a picture here with a statistic on it. This is the best current estimate is in Europe, about 2.5% of Europeans have a personal relationship with Jesus. I'm not saying they have like this, they're a member of the right church or like they're Pentecostal or anything like that. Just across the board, people who would describe themselves as having a personal relationship with Jesus, about 2.5%. We believe, though, that the light of the gospel shines bright in dark places and that God has not abandoned his church. And so we work at the Bible school there. Pastor Bruce mentioned it, Continental Theological Seminary, there's a picture of it. And we followed the example of Jesus to train up men, women who have been called to go out. They'll pastor churches, they'll plant new churches, they're evangelists, they're missionaries. And we work with them and we see how God is working to spread his kingdom across Europe. We have students from 35 nations. This is the largest Bible school, Pentecostal Bible school in Europe. Students from 35 nations come and study there. And I wish I had time to tell you all of their stories. I really do. They're amazing men and women who've sensed this calling to proclaim the gospel all over Europe. Even all over the world. I've never told this story before, but I can't get it out of my mind. I remember working with a student, young man who was in my class, and after class, he was out in the hallway and he was on the cell phone. And then I was listening to him talk on the cell phone, and I realized he's telling whoever's on the other line everything that I told him in class. Like my whole class, he's just repeating on the phone. I found out from him he's came from Rwanda, studying at our school. And he was sent from amongst all the pastors there in Rwanda to study, and that now he's on the phone, he's just relaying everything to train the whole group of pastors down there in his home country. We had students like Hakeem. Hakeem's not his real name. He asked that we don't share his real name. He's a student from Pakistan. He's careful to protect his identity. He was passionate about seeing the Bible translated into all the different languages, not like the small languages in his home country. And he worked as a Bible translator there. He came to our school, and I was able to have him I teach Hebrew. I taught him Hebrew and Greek. He was so interested in learning all those little nuances, especially like idioms. Idioms like you say, I'm on the fence. You're not literally on a fence. You're trying to make a decision between one or two things. He wanted to know Hebrew idioms so that he could accurately translate the Bible into these small tribal languages there in Pakistan. I'll never forget one time we had a break during class, and he didn't come back. And then students told me, I said, where's Hakeem? Where'd he go? And they said, well, he got a phone call. See, the village where he's at, there's a Christian school where his kids go, and the Muslims had taken control of the city, surrounded the school, and they didn't know where his kids were at. So we stopped, we prayed, God protect them. We found out the next day, they managed to get the kids on a bus, and they drove outside the city, and they were able to hide the bus. They spent the night on the bus. The next day, they were able to get returned to their families. Things settled down. We had students like Tebow. Man, I wish you could meet Tebow. It's pronounced just like Tim Tebow. It's spelled differently, though. It's a French name. Tebow, he's probably a typical European student. He's from Switzerland. He came to our school. Now, he went to college, like a lot of our students. He went to college and studied something else. He was an architect, and so he had his job working, designing houses, doing all of that stuff. And then he loved Jesus, and Tebow had someone who has the personality of an evangelist. Just winsome, talks to everybody, becomes your best friend within 2 minutes. That was Tebow. He just would talk to anybody. He'd go out on the street, become friends with everybody. And he did this in Switzerland. He would go out on the street and he would tell people about Jesus, how much he loved Jesus and how God loved them. And he was good at it. He would pray with people. They would accept Jesus into their lives, but he knew that you don't just pray for someone, you've got to disciple them, right? And so he would pray for them, they would become a Christian, and then he invited them into his house and started doing Bible study with them, discipling them, working them through. And day after day, week after week went by, the Bible study grew because he kept sharing the gospel with people. And then at some point, he's got his friend helping him now lead this Bible study, and they realized, I think we're planning a church. I think that's what's happening here. The Bible study is growing, and we're beginning to have a church here. And then he said, I don't really know anything about how to plant a church or how to pastor a church, so he came to our school. One of the reasons I like telling his story is because our first year there was his last year. And I had him for every single class, my first year teaching. So I got to know him really well, but then we saw him graduate, and we saw him go back to the ministry that his friend was leading the Bible study there in Belgium, or there in Switzerland. And he was able to successfully plant this church. Shortly before the pandemic started, they took their first missions trip as a church. Because this is how it happens. This is how the gospel goes from, I heard the gospel from someone who heard the gospel from someone who heard the gospel from someone, and it just spreads like this. I'll be really honest with you. I want to be back in Belgium so bad right now. It's hard to be here. I love you guys. I really do. And the question I keep hearing God ask me, do you trust me? Do you trust me? Do you? Are you able to set aside all of your ambitions? Set aside your dreams? Remember the Sabbath. Keep it holy. Thank you, Real Life Church.